Alright, so based on the types of videos that I tend to create, a lot of people who are either new to the fandom or are still trying to learn about it come to me for high-level explanations about furries. And one of the most common categories of questions I tend to get is comparing and contrasting the furry fandom to other fandoms and communities. And that makes sense, right? I mean, even though I tend to praise how unique this community is compared to others, there are a lot of fundamental things about this fandom that we share with others, notably larger fandoms as well. Now, since the first introduction to the fandom for many people are fursuits, a common question I get about this fandom is, are we just another cosplaying fandom? At first glance, this might be a simple yes. Fursuiting or costuming in our community is a very important aspect of this fandom. I'm literally doing it right now. But there are some key differences between fursuiting as our personas or characters and cosplay that I think are important to call out. So important, in fact, that they build on the differences that this fandom has with other, more general nerdy fandoms, especially whom or what we are celebrating when we put on and wear our colorful furry carpets. Let me explain. Let's start by comparing our furry fandom with the more generic cosplay fandom or community. As I said earlier, there are a lot of similarities between these two communities, especially when it comes to the costuming side of things. Many of us spend a lot of time, and indeed a lot of money, commissioning and creating our own costumes. Now, in the traditional cosplay community, it's more common to work on and create your costume yourself, starting with some basic materials like face paint and wigs, and slowly expanding over time as your costuming experience increases. And while the low barrier to entry is very similar in the furry fandom, we tend to rely much more on the skills of artists and fursuit makers to actually put together the raw materials that make up our costumes. I'm sure it does happen, but going to a third-party artist and asking them to build you a cosplay for something is probably a relatively uncommon occurrence in the traditional cosplay community. In fact, depending on who you talk to, that might be outright discouraged in the cosplay community. There is a sense of pride in working with what you have to create even a basic cosplay, as long as it was you who put it together. In contrast, going to fursuit makers or other artists in the furry fandom to create parts or all of your fursuit is more than acceptable, to the point where it's a full-time job for them. And I'm glad that's the case, because ain't no way I'd be able to create this from a pile of purple and yellow fur. Another big similarity between these two communities is where we gather to perform in our respective costumes. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary to see cosplays at not just cosplay-specific conventions, but really any sci-fi, gaming, fantasy, or otherwise nerdy convention. In fact, that's where furry came from in the first place. The community interested in anthropomorphic animals grew from those communities to the point where it was large enough to support itself. And we still see roots of this connection today. The chances of finding a group fursuiting at a sci-fi or other fiction-based events are very high these days. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we've actually started to see this circle of the two communities supporting each other close completely, as we're starting to see more and more traditional, non-furry cosplayers at furry conventions as well. And everyone is entitled to their own opinion on them, but I actually welcome them. Not everyone can either afford or simply want a fursuit, and as long as they're being respectful, they are welcome, ironically novel additions to the costumes at furry conventions. Long story short, both cosplay and fursuiting are performing arts. They allow members of each respective community to express their creativity and allow them to get into character to perform with and for members of their respective fandoms. But while these two performing arts are similar, there is one big difference that I like to highlight that separates the cosplay community from the furry fandom, and it mainly has to do with who or what members of each community are dressing up as. Because while yes, both portray the role of characters, where those characters come from and who they're ascribed to is, in most cases, completely different. It's actually a difference that can be used to describe what makes the furry fandom different from most, if not all, other fandoms out there. While other fandoms are mostly tied to one or many things, furries are all tied by the expression of an idea. When you look at the cosplay community or the cosplay side of other fandoms, the goal is to create and portray something that fits into an already existing universe or franchise. If you like a certain anime, you may dress up as a character from that show, or a character of your creation, but it's meant to fit into the universe of that show as well. This is where cosplayers scratch that creative itch. Adapting themselves to a fantasy universe can be tricky, but a lot of fun if you get it right. And it gets them as close as they really can to being and interacting with other people, essentially pretending to be a part of the world from a piece of media that they enjoy. But the difference that I'm trying to underscore is the fact that the media that people cosplay as already exists and is more or less owned by a specific publishing company. It's IP at the end of the day. That's not the case in the furry fandom. This fandom is not tied to each other by one thing, but more by one idea. anthropomorphic animals. And what's cool about that is that no one owns the idea of anthro-animals by the fact that it's an idea. Everyone has a unique interpretation of what that means, and in the case of cosplay, how they fit into the universe surrounding that idea. So when talking about fursuiters in the furry community, they aren't dressing up as members of someone else's universe or idea. They are dressing up as themselves, or how they see themselves as anthropomorphic animals. These fursuits are the expressions of how we all interpret the idea of a world where we are all anthro-animal versions of ourselves, which leads to a specific type of uniqueness that I haven't found an equivalent not just in the cosplaying world, but in the fandom world in general. Now again, this is the high-level difference between the costuming aspect of the two communities, but as we were discussing earlier, there are still a lot of similarities in how both communities go about cosplaying. In both communities, there is still a celebration of the skill of creating the costume, and while many furries go the commissioning route of obtaining theirs, it's not out of the ordinary for furries to make their own costumes and fursuits, even from the ground up. And let's not forget the performing side of things. In both cosplay and the furry community, the goal is to put on an act and perform as the character that you are dressing up as. The difference is that in cosplay, the personality, mannerisms, and aura, there's your Gen Z term of the day, of the character is already predefined by whomever owns or created that character. Whereas in the furry fandom, we own all of our characters, so we're acting as how we would see ourselves in a world full of anthropomorphic animals. So even though the end result, the production of the cosplay, may look similar, it's who we're portraying that separates fursuiting from just general cosplay. Now, I don't want to ever blame anyone for conflating the furry fandom with just another cosplay community, because from an outsider's perspective, the end result looks very similar. Both communities create and dress up as characters in their own respective universes to get us close to being actual parts of that universe by acting in a community full of others doing the exact same thing. The difference between the two, though, lies beneath the surface of what we all end up seeing as the end result of these acts. The furry fandom is based not on a thing, but on an idea. The idea of how things would be if we were all anthropomorphic versions of ourselves. And our cosplays, our fursuits, partials, dino and raptor masks, paper fursuits, all of that, they're our personal interpretations of that idea, and as a result, also our furry personas that we are designing, creating, and putting out into the world. It's a subtle but special difference that gives the furry fandom a different experience from the cosplaying community. A difference that I find pretty special. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.